Hey guys, Wade Willis here for my playthrough of Umineko. This is part 11. We have at least 5 people missing. There was blood on Natsui's door. She did have the charm that she got from Jessica. Did that protect her from being taken? We don't know. Goda's one of them that's gone. Shannon was proposed to by George, but we don't know if Shannon is one of the people missing as well. No one has gone looking for her, unfortunately. I'm going to bet that she actually was taken as well, which is unfortunate because she is really one of the most genuinely nice people in this, or at least that's how it appears. I do like her a lot, and I think George is going to be pretty distraught when she's missing since obviously he proposed to her. So, tons up in the air. Who's died? Are they missing? Like, what's going on? We'll have to find out here. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the 3 cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what had happened. After that, she had realized that her mother wasn't with her, and she quickly got lonely. Maria left the cousins' room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her mother. Paying no heed to the 3 that were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Battler mumbled and rolled over in his sleep, but it wasn't enough to wake him up. After a while, Maria returned once again, opening the door with a lively bang. When she had left the room, her face had been sleepy, but now she was back and looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Battler's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping like it was a trampoline. Oh man, I would lose my shit if a little kid did that. Oh, while I was sleeping? Enemy raid. So ridiculous. After making sure I was awake, Maria moved over to George's bed and started jumping on that too. In that manner, the 3 of us were all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening.
ありがとう、マリアちゃん。僕たちは夕べが遅かったから寝坊しちゃったのを起こしてくれたんだね。でも、もう少しだけ起こし方を優しくしてくれると完璧だったから。
Yeah, that is a bit rude of a wake up.
ジョージ兄さんは本当に大人だよ。尊敬するぜ。
もうすぐ7時なんだな。ま、確かにもう起きてもいい頃だぜ。
His yawn made me yawn.
ローザおばさんが
That's not good.
部屋にいなかったの？もう起きてお屋敷の方に行っちゃったのかな。
I can understand why her mom doesn't want her to do that. As a 9-year-old hearing it. Maria kept groaning, ooh, and looking unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't there when she'd expected. If we could just tell her that where her mother was, that alone will probably calm her down. But unfortunately, we had no way of knowing where Aunt Rosa was, except that she wasn't here.
どうせ朝食に行くことになるんだし、屋敷の方に行こうぜ。
そうだな。マリア、一緒に屋敷へ行こうぜ。きっとローザおばさんもそこさ。
ママはお屋敷。
Maybe dead.
そうだね。お屋敷に行こうか。多分親たちはもう向こうに行ってるんだよ。
Maria regained her usual composure so completely, her earlier tantrum seemed like a lie. We got dressed, left the room, and headed to the mansion. What's the over-under on Aunt Rosa being dead, do you guys think? Once more, there was a knocking sound on the study door, but there was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still, and I could not wake him. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Ava would have assumed would be amused and triumphant. And even putting Ava aside, it was problematic that Kinzo had stayed shut in during the entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make an appearance. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsui readied herself and used the key she had borrowed from Genji to open the door. The door things remind me of Resident Evil. Even though she was prepared for the sweet stench, which seemed to eat one's brain as it poured out into the small crack of the door, she couldn't help but grimace. Thinking that he might still be sleeping, Natsui entered the room quietly. When she did, Kinzo was already awake and looking down out the window.
お目覚めでしたか。おはようございます。
どうやって入ったのか。
Kinzo spoke with his back facing her. His voice was not harsh, but calm, and Natsui was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsui wasn't able to relax.
申し訳ございませんでした。源氏さんにお願いして、書斎の鍵をお借りさせていただきました。
ほう、源氏がか。我が友がそれに足ると思ったならば、話を聞かぬわけにもいくがい。
He does really respect Genji.
して、私に何用か。
はい。もうじき朝食の準備が整いますが、ぜひお父様にもおいでいただきたく思いまして。
朝食はここで取る。いつものように運ばせるがいい。
しかしお父様、年に一度の親族会議です。
Girl, why don't you tell him that
せ
people
め
are
てお顔を
missing?
お見せになってください。
下に降りて、私の死後、遺産をどのように食いちぎるのかを決める議論に加われというのか。バカらしい。そのような話は私を抜きで好きに進めるがいい。
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be there for that
そし
either.
てそれが親族会議だというなら、私がこの部屋を出るほどの価値はない。私は忙しいのだ。構うでない。
His last words carry the threat that any further questions would not be appreciated. Natsui realized that adding any further pleas would finally bring his wrath upon her. She didn't look forward to facing Ava's sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsui could do.
そうですか。わかりました。みんな残念がるでしょうが、そう伝えます。
Why doesn't Natsui decided to give up? Bowing silently, she tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. As she did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle, it felt like it came from an entirely different person.
夏日、後ろ宮の家に嫁ぎ、もう随分になるな。
はい。後宮を名乗ることを許されてから、もう随分になります。
前の家が恋しくなることもあるか。
いいえ。嫁ぐとは、成果を捨てることです。私は後宮夏日。
Interesting.
帰る家も、懐かしむ家も、すべてはこの後宮の家のみです。
She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt when she applied to the Ushiromiya family name to herself. And that's precisely why she was so sad when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushiromiya, leaving her to race about in vain.
クラウスな女で、 お前がその夫であったならいや、それは言うまい。
Yes, she would have been a way better head.
どういう意味ですか、お父様。
Natsui was shocked. If Kinzo's words just now were what they seemed, it would have been more than enough to make up for all that she suffered up to that point. That's so sad that just words like that would just make up. Yeah, that's wild that she just feels that much for the family.
忘れよ。年寄りのざれ言だ。
Kinzo once again faced away from her. He told her to forget it, but Natsui couldn't help feeling warmth in her heart.
お父様、この夏日は血はつながらずともお父様の娘です。後ろ宮家の名誉も栄光も、そしてお父様が残されたものもすべて、この夏日が必ずや守ってみせますから。
お前に片翼のわしをまとう資格はない。しかしお前の心には確かに片翼のわしが刻まれている。ならばお前は間違いなく我が血族で後ろ宮家の栄光を引き継ぐものだ。お前の衣服にわしがないことを嘲笑う者もいよう。しかしそれに耳を貸すことはない。
Why is he saying all of this to her?
心にわしを持つ者だけが真の私の血族なのだ。
So he kind of looks at her like his close servants.
お前を後ろ宮家に迎えられたことを今は光栄に思っている。
Unless he's trying to manipulate her in some way. Without saying any more, Kinzo remained with his back toward Natsui. However, Natsui couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her that she hadn't felt since long ago, when she had been just a child. Natsui bowed silently to his back and left the room.
あら、ちょうどいいタイミングだったわね。お父様の様子はどう？あんまり遅いから様子を見に来ちゃったのよ。
When Natsui left the study, she saw Ava climbing the stairs and their eyes met. Ava was smirking unpleasantly, thinking that Natsui would leave grudgingly after failing to convince Kinzo. However, the way Natsui was now, such a frivolous laugh would not disturb her. She was not permitted to wear the family crest on her clothing, but she was permitted to wear it in her heart. So she spoke calmly, clearly, and confidently, with the dignity of one who would protect the Ushiromiya family's glory.
お父様は親族会議にはおいでにならないそうです。汚らわしい議題に関心はないと仰せです。
とかなんとか言っちゃって。お父様を説得できなかったんなら素直にそう言えばいいじゃない。
哀れですね。お父様が嘆かれるお気持ちも分かろうというものです。
それはどういう意味よ。
Nice. Natsui didn't answer. Just as Kinzo had done earlier, she showed Ava her back as she headed down the stairs. Ava finally realized that she was being made fun of, that something had happened to quickly bolster Natsui's confidence. Even so, she apparently didn't have the courage to risk Kinzo's wrath. Unable to even knock on the door, she could only click her tongue, make a motion as though scratching at it, and follow after Natsui.
それで兄さんたちはいたの？お父様に聞いたの？
聞きそびれましたが、書斎の中にはいませんでした。お父様が夫たちの下船な話のために入室を許すこともありえませんから、行き先下に降りて使用人たちが探してくれるのを待ちましょう。朝食は遅れますが、お茶でもいかがです？エヴァさん。
別に結構よ。
Ava couldn't hide her confusion at the complete difference in Natsui's attitude. She was acting so boldly, and while Ava hated to admit it, she even had a sense of dignity about her. Unable to find fault with anything, Ava could only follow Natsui back to the parlor. When the two of them returned to the parlor, Hideyoshi had been joined by the 4 children and Nanjo. Genji, who had been talking with Hideyoshi, reported the current situation when he noticed that Natsui had returned.
主人たちはまだ見つからないのですか？
はい、申し訳ございません。あと、熊沢が朝食の準備に入りました。もう少し時間をいただきたいとのことです。
The clock read a little past 8. 8 should have been the time to start breakfast. Normally going over that time limit would be a disgrace to the host.
今、カノンが表を探しています。それから、
No! I knew she would be missing.
シャノンまで？まったく、主人は何を従えて散歩に出かけたのですか？
Just how many people had gone missing by now? Now that the number was this large, it was starting to feel truly unpleasant, as though the people here were the only ones being left out of something interesting. Yeah, they're the only ones alive, probably. At least that seemed to reflect the feelings of the children, and Maria in particular. She was indignant, her stomach crumbling, almost as though her mother and the others had left her alone to go off and eat somewhere delicious without her. The other children were flipping through the channels on the television, trying to find a program that might interest Maria and cheer her up again. Nanja was sitting on the sofa, gazing blissfully at the children while reading a book. It must have been a book about chess. The sound of footsteps came rushing toward them with a pitter-patter. There was only one set, so they realized before seeing who it belonged to that it was probably Cannon, not Krause and the rest.
奥様、失礼します。
その様子では見つけられなかったようですね。
申し訳ございません。まだ。
もう十分です。ご苦労をかけました。
She didn't know where they were, but they had to be somewhere on this island. They hadn't had a thing to eat since the previous night, so their stomachs must have been growling by now. They'd probably come plodding back on their own accord before long. By now, Natsui was thoroughly exasperated and started to feel that there was no reason for them to go out of their way in search.
私はお客様方にお茶のご用意をしに厨房へ行きます。二人とも早朝からご苦労様でした。
Natsui left the parlor, acting as though the release intention had caused a new surge in her headache. Cannon tried to call her back, but Natsui left swiftly.
どうした？まだ何かあるのか？
はい。旦那様方のお姿を見つけることはできませんでしたが、その。
Cannon sounded evasive. It looked as though he didn't know where they were, but had spotted something that might be connected to their disappearance. Ava and Hideyoshi noticed this exchange of words and came over. They probably picked up on something strange in Cannon's behavior.
どうしたんや、カノン君。クラウス兄さんたちは見つかったんか？
実は、バラ庭園の倉庫の様子がおかしいのです。
様子がおかしいというのはどういう意味だ？
それが、何と説明すればいいのか。
Was it covered in blood or something? Cannon hesitated once more. His tone wasn't at all what you'd expect from a usually fearless boy. Seeing this, Ava and Hideyoshi looked at each other dubiously.
どういうこと？倉庫の中に兄さんたちがいたんじゃないの？
いえ、中はこれから調べます。
Bro, don't go by yourself.
その鍵を取りに戻ったところなのですが。
ようわからんが、とにかく中を調べればいいだけの話じゃないか。その倉庫の鍵はどこにあるんや？
使用人室にあります。すぐに中を確かめましょう。
Yo, I'm like nervous about this freaking storehouse thing. Kanon dashed off to the servant room and returned with the key. Genji left the parlor saying he would go check, but Eva and Hideyoshi followed after him. What was the something strange about the storehouse that had caused the usually fearless Kanon to hesitate? It was still pouring outside, but perhaps their curiosity over this something that Kanon couldn't talk about won out. While the children made a big fuss watching television, Kanon and the rest dashed over to the entrance. The Rose Garden storehouse was a place that housed various tools used to manage the garden. It was definitely not a pretty building. Because of its appearance, it had built so that it was hidden in the corner of the Rose Garden. Kanon, Genji, Eva, Hideyoshi came cutting through the Rose Garden, holding umbrellas. They entered a small path just off the Rose Garden, which was normally off limits to those appreciating the garden, and only used by those maintaining it. As they dashed down that, the storehouse came into view in front of them. There's going to be some weird... It was quite an old shed, and compared to the flawlessly perfect beauty of the Rose Garden, it was pretty seedy looking. It was easy to understand why it had been built in a hard-to-see place. Eva and Hideyoshi arrived at the storehouse long after Kanon and Genji. Yeah, of course, this fat boy.
カノン君たちは早いな。わしは心臓が爆発しそうや。
こんなところに倉庫なんか建ててたのね。何よそれ。
When Eva looked where Kanon was pointing, she was at a loss for words. Noticing this, Hideyoshi also followed Kanon's finger and was likewise too shocked to speak. The entrance to the storehouse was kind of a shutter. And there, everyone suddenly realized why Kanon was unable to find words to describe what they now saw. On the shutter, which was completely filthy from being exposed to wind and rain for so long, stuck right on it. I knew there would be... I'm not surprised. There was something that looked like a strange dark red liquid. Mucus? Or maybe it was some sticky pig. No, it's blood, yo! An indescribably eerie shape was drawn on the shutter with some kind of ghastly substance. The rain had caused it to drip down like a fresh blood leaking from an open wound. No more beating around the bush. Some kind of mark was drawn there, with a ghastly substance that looked like blood, in a shape that seemed to suggest something pretty ominous. Yeah, magic circle. 2 circles were drawn there, and inside them was a design that looked like a cross. The 4 ends of the cross were widely exaggerated, and it looked like some kind of crest from somewhere around Europe. And in the cracks between these shapes, written closely packed together, were some unfamiliar characters or possibly symbols.
なんちゅう悪趣味な落書きや。これ、あれか？悪魔の儀式とかの魔法陣いうやつとちゃうか？
That's exactly what it is. It wasn't surprising that Hideyoshi would say that about such a ghastly shape drawn with a deep, red dripping substance.
これいつ書かれたの？
昨日雨が降り出す前にここに来ましたが、その時には何も書かれてませんでした。
他の方々の目に触れる前に何とかしよう。ご覧になられたらご不快になられるだろう。
そうね。ただの倉庫小屋とはいえ、こんな気持ち悪い落書きを1秒たりとも放置したくないわ。
倉庫の中に塗料もあります。応急処置でとりあえず塗り消して、後日天気のいい日に改めて塗装しましょう。
Genji remembered that he had just recently seen another scribble, and that it too had been made with a strange dark red substance of the same color as this. That must have been... That's right, he had seen it on the door in Natsui's room.
カノン君、さっさとこの落書きを消して戻りましょう。たとえ倉庫とはいえ、 実家の落書きは本当に腹立たしいわ。
はい、すぐに済ませますので。
Cannon squatted in front of the shutter and unlocked it. I have a feeling they're going to find 6 bodies in there. He then lifted it up with all of his strength. A boisterous noise resounded, and the eerie shape drawn on the shutter began to be sucked in through the top as the shutter was raised. At least for the time being, that ominous drawing disappeared from their direct gaze, and they all breathed a sigh of relief. Dang! Thanks to a kids program they came across, Maria was feeling much better. Battler and Jessica were poking fun at the kids' show, at every turn cackling together. George was enjoying the program with Maria from her perspective. Nanjo, I forgot this guy's here still. Nanjo sat on the sofa by himself, passing time reading quietly. They heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. They were all footsteps of a single person. Did that mean the group of 4 had just left? It was Genji. It was very rare to see Genji, who was considered out of breath, a violation of servant virtues, to be gasping for air. He probably had come dashing back from outside the mansion. His shoulders were soaking wet, and he didn't have his usual trim appearance. When Genji noticed Nanjo looking at him, he gave a small, silent bow and quickly approached him.
Nanjo sensei, 申し訳ございません。至急お越しください。
Oh no.
何事ですかな?
Genji whispered something into Nanjo's ear. Nanjo went pale. He rose from the sofa, trying not to be noticed by the children who were still engrossed by the TV, and the 2 of them rapidly left the parlor, muffling their footsteps. Just as they were about to exit the parlor, they came across Natsui, who was pushing a servant cart loaded with tea set. Genji whispered something into Natsui's ear, and Natsui went pale too in apparent shock. Then, leaving the servant cart where it was, the 3 of them dashed towards the entrance. George noticed them running down the rose garden through the window.
なんだろう。源氏さんと南條先生と、あれは夏日おばさんかな。
どうしたんだよ、兄貴。
何かあったのかな。ひどい慌てようだったね。
When Jessica and Maria saw that Ava, Hideyoshi, and Nanjo were no longer at their seats, and the servant cart had been abandoned in the entrance of the parlor, they also realized that something was the matter.
何か事故でもあったとか？
行ってみようぜ。俺たちだけのけ者なんて面白くねえしな。
You'll want to be left out. For some reason, what Battler said sounded extremely indiscreet. But they couldn't deny that they were a little insecure and concerned after seeing the adults run off into the rain without regard to their appearance.
行ってみようぜ。何があったか気になるぜ。
Jessica's uneasy words spoke for all of them.
おい、マリア。
Dude,
お前も来るか。
don't bring Maria.
それとも、テレビを見てるか。
おお、マリアはテレビがいい。
Oh, thank God. Imagine if she was the one who did everything.
僕たちだけで行こ
I know she didn't.
う。マリア
But
ちゃん、すぐ戻るからね。テレビを見て待ってるんだよ。
by the time the kids made it outside, the adults were no longer in sight. But Jessica seemed to have a pretty good idea where they'd gone, judging by the direction they had been running. Following Jessica, we ran through the rain-soaked rose garden. The wind seemed to suddenly get stronger. The malicious sound of thunder began to ring out, like it had the previous night. It felt like an eerie something had surrounded the island and was trying to stop us from moving forward.
ジェシカ、この先には何があるんだ。
確か園芸道具なんかの倉庫があったはずだぜ。
そんなところに一体何があるんだろうね。
Just as Jessica had said that, they began to see the storehouse in front of them. They could also see the adults there. The shutter to the storehouse was open, and several adults were looking as though they were searching for something. For some reason, only Natsui was outside the storehouse without even holding an umbrella. She looked like she was hanging her head, and her back was facing them. There was Genji, Nanjo, and Natsui who had just left the mansion. The ones who left earlier, Kanon, Ava, and Hideyoshi were also there, making a small crowd of people. But there was absolutely no bustle of activity. When Natsui realized the children were approaching, a terrible expression rose to her face, and she ran at them with her arms spread wide. But despite that, no, because of that, the kids saw the scene Natsui was trying to keep away from them. Inside the storehouse, with its shutters wide open, a faint fluorescent light shone down. And right there it was. Jessica's piercing shriek rang out. But that was just because Jessica's scream was the loudest. The same thing spilled out of Battler and George's mouths as well. Ava spread her arms, just like Natsui's roaring face, at the kids with a bone-chilling expression on her face.
Georgie!
What's there? When Natsui spread her arms, I thought that she was trying to prevent us from advancing any further. But that wasn't why Ava was spreading her arms right now. She was trying to stop us kids from seeing that terrible scene. It was her mother's heart trying to protect the eyes of the children by blocking the view of the terrible scenes with the width of one of her arms. I'd seen this kind of cheap scene all too often. In manga, TV, anime, and movies, I'd seen it over and over again. This was just seeing something appear in real life that I'd seen plenty of times before in some of those more sensational movies, right? That alone shouldn't... but that suit, it's that old bastard's, isn't it? I get it. Then that's Uncle Kraus and Kirie-san and Aunt Rosa. Oh. Oh. This is intense. Aunt Natsui caught Jessica at her arms and Aunt Ava caught George and Nikki. So I was the only one who could approach the entrance to the storehouse. If only there had been someone there to catch me too. I wouldn't have needed to have this horrible, evil scene burned into my eyes. No, that's not it. It's not that there was no one to catch me. The people who should catch me, they're right there, aren't they? Just as Jessica said, it didn't look like a storehouse for gardening tools. A lawnmower with extra blades, a grass sickle, and a hammer. Some carpentry tools, such as a saw, piled up potted plants, and bags of fertilizer, and treated just the same as the corpses of several people who had been laid to rest there. No, had been tossed in there. I could tell them by their clothes. That old bastard and Kirie-san, Uncle Kraus, and Aunt Rosa. Beyond that, Goda-san. And are there still more of them? How many people died? Are you fucking kidding me? I can't even count them on one hand. Damn it! I didn't know whether it had been one of these gardening tools which was used for something other than their intended purposes. Other than their intended purpose could definitely be wielded with naked brutality, or whether some horrible tool had been brought in there specifically for this. Anyway, each one of the bodies jammed in here had been given an atrocious makeup. It wasn't makeup, it was more like their faces had been plowed. Their faces were smashed, forced to do expressions that normal people couldn't even make after death. I couldn't tell where their eyes and noses were, but I could find their mouths because they were gaping wide open, their gums exposed. But their front teeth were missing, and even their cheeks that should have been covered all this were torn up and laid bare. That trendy makeup you always see spent so much time, even though you're a man, isn't doing a thing now.
Oyaji! てめえは絶対地獄行きだとは思ってたぜ。でもよ、ここまでじゃねえだろ。ここまでひでえ目に遭わされるほどの悪党じゃなかっただろうがよ。だからキリエさんもさ、こんな男と付き合うのはやめろって言ったんだ。あんたまでそこまでの目に遭わされる理由は何もねえじゃねえかよ。顔がねえ。クソクソクソクソ。
バトラさん、これ以上見てはいかん。こんな姿をお父さんもお母さんもあんたに見せたいわけがない。お父さんとお母さんのためにもこれ以上見てはいかん。
死者ってのは安らかに眠る顔ってやつを拝ませてくれるんじゃねえのかよ。顔がねえんだよ。俺の親父とキリエさんの顔がねえんだよ。どういう顔して死んじまったのか、それすらもわかんねえんだよ。なんだよ俺は。親父たちのことを思い出すときはこのくちゃくちゃの化け物みてえな顔をいつも思い出せたのかよ。そいつが最高だぜ。クソ親父のニヤニヤとした顔を思い出さなくていいんだからよ。最高だぜ最高だぜ。でもよ、キリエさんの顔くらいはいいだろ。キリエさんの悪党じゃねえ。たまにはムカつくと思ったけどよ、ちょいとかっこいい俺の姉気分だったお人じゃねえかよ。こりゃねえよ、こんなのってねえよ。クロスおじさんなんかまだマシじゃねえか。顔面じゃなくて側面だぜ。少なくとも顔半分は残ってるじゃねえかよ。まだマシだぜまだマシだぜ。
Yeah, maybe don't yell that where Jessica's just chilling there. We could have called that, couldn't we? Jessica filled her ears with the sound of her own screaming, trying to shout out my reckless words.
よすんだバタラ君、もうよすんだ、もうよすんだ。兄貴兄貴。
Discarding age and appearance, I fell to my knees, clinging on Aniki's waist and sobbing. It was as if I was crying on behalf of everyone there, representing the feelings of everyone there. I screamed over and over and over. Yeah, well, Aniki's probably gonna see Shannon. Oh.
Oh, お父さん。倒れているのは、クラウスおじさん、ルドルフおじさん、キリエおばさんに、ローザおばさん、ゴーダさんで、5人。
いや、6人や。ここに、もう一人おる。
The body Hideyoshi was looking down on now happened to be hidden among the shadows in that mountain range of objects, in a blind spot to George, who stood by the entrance. So George couldn't tell whose body it was. So George cursed himself. He cursed himself for the fact that his worst guesses always turned out to be right.
じゃあ、お父さんの足元に倒れているのは、シャノンなんだね。
ああ、
Oh,
シャノンちゃんや。
poor George. George felt completely silent. He shook slightly, his lower lip trembling. Normally, he would have wanted to run to his beloved's body, screaming and crying. However, before rashly rushing forward, he worked to keep his composure and asked his father,
シャノンも、クラウスおじさんたちと、同じなのかな。
Hideyoshi deeply understood the meaning of those words, so he couldn't give George an immediate answer, or rather, he felt that silence was the only sincere and loving response that he could give George right now. When George asked if Shannon was the same, he meant to ask whether her corpse was in the same condition as the others or not. So Hideyoshi hadn't denied it. He meant her corpse was the same as in the same brutal state.
シャノンを見てもいいかな。
いや、あかん。
どうして？だって、もう二度とシャノンの顔を見られないんだよ。
Oh,
その、最後の顔、
is hers the worst?
どうして見たらいけないんだよ。
お前が最後にシャノンちゃんに会ったのは昨日か。
うん。
そうか。
You should remember how you last
そ
saw her.
のシャノンちゃんは別れ際にお前にどんな顔を見せたんや。
素敵な笑顔だったよ。
After he handed her the ring, she hesitated, even though she must have already made up her mind. Then she looked bashful, and she ran away because she was embarrassed to let him see her face looking like that. That's the expression that was revived in George's mind.
そうか。ならシャノンちゃんもその笑顔をお前に残したいと願うはずや。
Hideyoshi looked down upon Shannon's body lying at his feet. Just like the other bodies, it was in such a horrible state that it'd make anyone want to cover their eyes. Her head had been smashed from the side, and no more than half her expression remained. The remaining blood-soaked half on her expression had been wiped clean. Would that graceful smile of hers have peeked out, but only half of it? Ugh. Without thinking, Hideyoshi slapped his hands over his eyes. How brutal. Her face was going to be crushed anyways. Then if only it all had been crushed. He might have been able to temporarily distract George from his pain, making the pathetic suggestion that it was someone else wearing Shannon's clothes. But half of the face had been left untouched. It caused the body so much humiliation when such proving beyond doubt that body was Shannon's and no one else's. How humane, how brutish. And there, trying his best to burn the image of their remaining half of Shannon's expression into his eyes as she lay at Hideyoshi's feet, was Cannon. Cannon was not crying. Tears had risen into his eyes, but they did not drip down. But that didn't mean he wasn't feeling as much sadness as everyone else. Losing Shannon, who had lived with him in the same orphanage, who he had loved as a sister, must have been just the same as losing a blood relative.
ジョージ、シャノンちゃんはきっとありがとう言うてるぞ。お前に恥ずかしいところを見られとうなかったんや。きっとお前が耐えてくれたこと感謝しとるで。
わかってる。わかってるよ、父さん。わかってるよ。
George leaned against the outside wall of the storehouse, crouching down limply.
父さん、頼みがあるんだ。
なんや。
僕の代わりに見てほしいんだ。シャノンは指に指輪をつけてるかな。
指輪？ちょいと見てみる。
Hideyoshi crouched down. As he did, Cannon slightly pointed to one of Shannon's hands.
ああ、あるで。こりゃ、ダイヤの指輪や。クズダイヤとちゃう。なかなかの値打ちもんや。
それは、どっちの手の、どの指にあるのかな。
と、左手の薬指や。そっか、シャノンちゃん、婚約しとったんか。
Bro, yeah, to your
ジョ
son.
ージ、あなた、まさか。
エヴァ、今はそんなん関係ないで。シャノンちゃんは男に将来を約束されとったんや。一生を幸せにしちゃると男に言わせたんや。それが誰かは問題とちゃうで。男にそこまで言わしめて、女の本懐やないか。いつこの指輪をもらったんかは知らん。誰が渡したかも知らん。だが、それでも、シャノンちゃんは指輪をもらえたんや。そして、それを受け入れ、左の薬指に通したんや。指輪を送った男も、きっと喜んだんとちゃうか？
To most of the people there, Hideyoshi was simply disturbed by this extraordinary situation and was blurting out nonsense. However, someone who knew of George and Shannon's true relationship would understand the meaning of those words.
そっか。ありがとう、父さん。
George stood up. The traces of tears still streaked his face, but his expression had returned to its usual calm one.
行こう。バトラ君、ジェシカちゃん。これ以上、僕たちがここにいると、大人の邪魔になる。
そうだな。
Jessica sniffled once, showing her face to her mother, who had been holding her the whole time, to let her know she was okay. When she faced George again, she once again had on her usual expression, although she couldn't smile.
バトラー、しっかり。
Battler kept on crouching in front of his parents' bodies.
すまねえな。がっつり泣いたら落ち着いたぜ。親父の野郎、普段はクソクソ言ってるくせに。ちょっと死んじまったくらいでピーピー泣くんじゃねえぜって笑ってやがれ。仕方ねえだろ。親が死んだら泣くように遺伝子すり込まれちまってたからよ。
Battler's face was still bright red from the tears, but he had at least recovered enough to fake a smile, if only a bitter one.
カノン、お前もこれ以上ここにいてはいけません。子供たちを連れてお屋敷に戻っていなさい。
Natsui had been standing under the rain this whole time, unable to take a step in the storehouse. Maybe she had her own way of grieving different from Battler's. Realizing that she had to take the role of responsibility now that her husband was dead, she gave Cannon those orders.
はい。奥様。
Cannon rose silently and turned to face me. His face was pure white, almost as though his own heart had died along with Shannon, and there was no life in his expression. And on an ordinary day, if he had been told to guide the children through the beautiful rose garden, Cannon might have led the way. but now there was no distinction between Cannon and the children. They were now just kids about the same age, suffering from pain and losing those close to them. After making sure that the children were leaving, Natsui started giving orders to Genji.
ケンチ、すぐに警察に連絡しなさい。台風が通り過ぎるまでは来られないでしょうが、どうすればいいか指示を与えてくれるはずです。
わかりました。防災用の無線機がありますので、それで連絡します。
When she heard that, Natsui remembered. That's right, the phones were out today, weren't they? However, they also had a radio since they couldn't necessarily rely on phones all the time when living on an isolated island. At any rate, they should start by contacting the police and receiving their instructions. Everything else could wait.
ナチョ先生、もうこの場はどうしようもありませんか？
残念ながら私には何もできませんな。
わかりました。源氏、せめて主人たちの顔を何かで覆ってやることはできませんか？このような姿を晒すことは当人にとっても屈辱的。
はい。
Genji picked up several dry towels from inside the storehouse when Ava stopped him with a shrill voice.
ちょっとちょっと、お待ちなさいよ。ここは犯行現場なんでしょ？なら変に手を加えちゃダメよ。私たちは混乱してて現場に土足で踏み入っちゃったけど、それはきっと警察の捜査の邪魔になったわよ。
Natsui glared at Ava, offended. Objectively speaking, Ava was right. Even so, she glared at Ava as though accusing her of refusing to do those tragic corpses which had been humiliated even after death, the simple kindness of covering their faces. However, Ava had spoken both calmly and correctly. This horrible situation definitely wasn't an accident. It was a crime. Someone had killed them. It was a murder case. So they needed to be careful to avoid disturbing the site any further. They had to do what little they could to aid the police, preserving clues that might help catch the detestable culprit.
私もエヴァさんに賛成ですな。警察が来るまでここは手をつけずにしておくべきです。
奥様、いかがなさいますか？
そうですね。わかりました。ここを閉ざしなさい。それから念のためここに別の施錠をするように。
別の施錠？
ええ。ここに来た時シャッターの鍵は閉じていました。ということはシャッターの鍵を使い犯人が施錠したということです。
確かに通りや。じゃあここを開けた限り犯人の指紋が残ってるんとちゃうんか。
警察に証拠として提出する価値はカノン君が普通に持ってここを開けるのに使用しちゃったわ。多分カノン君の指紋も付着しちゃってるわよ。そしてその鍵はさっき源氏さんに手渡され、源氏さんも素手で受け取ってる。大した証拠にはなりそうにないわね。
それは不用心でした。申し訳ございません。
源氏さん、この倉庫の鍵は他にもあるんか？
いいえ、この一つだけです。
Okay, I'm gonna stop here, guys. Yeah, this is obviously it went pretty wild in this part. I didn't think that they would kill for sure 6 people right there, but I mean, that's a lot of people out of commission already. And there's still, I'm assuming they're gonna have some weird like Higurashi thing where people can come back and stuff. perhaps. They did talk about resurrection in the riddle, so I'm assuming some people are going to come back, or maybe there are loops or something that we don't know about yet. But yeah, that is pretty wild. They just killed, you mean, 1/3 of the people in one foul swoop. So I'm curious to see how they go forward with this, but I'm really intrigued. And yeah, this is getting real instance. Oh, and in this thing they show all the people that are dead. So yeah, how many do we have left? 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 11. So there's 11 people left that we know of. But we don't know about witches or anything yet. Beatrice isn't on the board yet. So I guess we'll see soon. I'm really curious of what the hell's going to happen. But yeah, guys, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And yeah, keep following along this journey with me.